Hello, everyone. This is Michele and Tittler from the political organization in Canada called End Race-Based Law. I am here with Gerry Gagnon, and the title of today's newscast today in Canada, race laws in the news, is changing their story. There are so many stories to cover. I just leave it up to Gerry to decide which one we're going to do. And he's here waiting. He's going to cover a few different stories. And this is just the title he's given me. And we've purposefully done this where I don't necessarily know what he's going to say so that I can react honestly to it, because some of this stuff is pretty reactionable. All right, it's February 14th today of today's recording, but it's timeless information, 2025. All right, here we go. And hello, Gerry.
Good morning, Michele. Hope you're staying warm this morning. This cold winter just goes on and on and on. The price we pay for being Canadians, eh? Okay, well, the changing their story part, that can refer to so many things, because our Canadian history seems to be getting rewritten constantly. We're told that was true, what we thought was true wasn't true, and now there's a new story that's true, and there's no argument allowed, and etc. Right? But every once in a while, some of us who like to do research go back into the past and see what was said back then, quote, compared to what's being said today. Now, I'd like to start off by thanking a fellow named Phantom Philosopher on X, formerly known as Twitter. He likes to do this as well, to dig into the past, and I owe him for this particular story. And it refers to the residential schools narrative that's currently been a mainstream story now in Canada for the last, about 4 years, since the pandemic. It took over after the pandemic, all of the supposed graves at the residential schools. And of course, it was culminated by our parliament unanimously passing a motion declaring the residential schools had been genocidal. And every party in the House of Commons voted for this foolishness, by the way. So anyway, I have a few examples here. Back in 1946, the government surveyed the chiefs and etc. Involved with residential schools to get their opinions on various. It wasn't just about the schools, but schooling was part of the surveying. And so I'm going to first quote you what somebody said back in 1946, and then what their present statement is, so you can see the difference. I've got 4 examples. This is the post. It's on endracebasedlaw.ca, but I want to read them to you just for effect and for my pleasure, as it were. Okay, so first of all, the Dogrib Indians. Now, the Dogrib, or Dogrib, and I'm not sure how they pronounce it, they're also known as the Tlicho. They're a Dene people from the Northwest Territories in Canada. And the name Dogrib is an English adaptation of their own name, referring to their fabled descent from a supernatural dogman. That's their origin story. Okay, so back in 1946, their statement to the government was, quote, "We Dogrib Indians of Fort Ray, Northwest Territories, respectfully submit to the Indian Affairs Branch the present system of education approved by the Dominion government and set up by the Indian Affairs Branch is satisfactory to us, and no change whatever is either desired or will be accepted by us," unquote. Now, on their website in 2024, we read, quote, "We are all healing from the traumatic effects of racism, discrimination, and genocidal assimilationist policies and systems, such as the Indian residential school system and the 60s scoop," unquote. Now, that's just one example. Of course, it could be, this one tribe changed their mind over time, but let's check out a couple more here. There's a reserve in BC called the Shulus Reserve. That's Shulus. And in 1946, they simply responded, quote, "The chief, I am satisfied with my schools," unquote. Now, excuse me. Now on their website in 2024, we read, "We can never forget our residential school survivors. We must commemorate and honor all our survivors. I encourage all of you to help educate those people who do not understand the residential school legacy. I encourage you to share your knowledge and wisdom, if you so choose, to help educate our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters who wish to learn about our history." Unquote. Okay, well, another BC reserve, this one known as the Obama Reserve, said originally in 1946, quote, "We, the Indians of Ohamel Reserve, submit the following demands to the Special Joint Committee in Ottawa. We believe the present system of education is satisfactory and no change is desired. We would like to see the present residential schools enlarged and new ones built." Unquote. And now in 2024, the federal government and Catholic churches created the residential school system, which had an even further devastating effect on our communities. Our children, as young as 5 years old, were abducted and imprisoned at these residential schools far outside their territories. Unquote. And if I could just use your patience for one more here, if I can. This is the chief of the Lower Kootenay Reserve in BC, also in 1946. Quote, "We have been invited by the principal of the school at Cranbrook, BC, where our children attend, to visit the school and see the conditions for ourselves. As we live a considerable distance from the school, it is not often that we have such an opportunity, and most of our information has been from the children when they return home. This information has sometimes been exaggerated. We are pleased to find that the sisters who are teaching are qualified teachers with normal school training and moreover are experienced in their profession. We find the classrooms in good order. We are pleased to see that the principal has arranged to have grades 1 and 2 take a full day in class. We would like to see all grades in class for the full day. The principal assures us that this will be put into effect when there is sufficient grant money to employ necessary extra staff. At school, our children should learn their religion so that they may be good citizens and good Christians. We do not want our children sent to non-religious schools." Unquote. Now in 1964, from the chief of the Lower Kootenay Reserve, "Let's call this for what it is. It is a mass murder of Indigenous people. The Nazis were held accountable for their war crimes. I see no difference in locating the priests and nuns and the brothers who are responsible for this mass murder to be held accountable for their part in this attempt of genocide of an Indigenous people." Unquote.
I'm sorry, but that just sounds like a demon-possessed drunk. A
Well,
greedy, demon-possessed drunk. That's just exactly what that sounds like. As a
these
racist, sorry, I forgot to add racist thug, greedy, resentful.
these stories do not reconcile. I'm sorry. Like the extremity.
Isn't it interesting that all of the new
Mm,
stories all have the same dialogue from the United Nations? It's like
yes,
it's a script. It's a script.
yes,
You were hard
yes. It's
done by
this.
learning English and math and everything else. And we all went to
Yes.
the same school system. I mean, whatever they say, I mean, the truth is that the cabal has been trafficking children. That's happened to all of the cultures and races, but not just to the natives, right? And we all went to the same school systems. And the Doukhobors and lots of people had to travel long distances. That was really sort of the point of them going to residential schools, is that they couldn't just put up a school. Like this, the natives were spread out.
Mhm.
They were spread out, and now I think we all agree that it was truly negative that an entire town would be stripped of their children. I mean, that really was a devastating effect for everybody, but nobody really saw that coming at the time. They really thought that the education was more important. I mean, there's different ways of doing it now. We can do it online, right? But I mean, they can have smaller school systems, but they just couldn't reach them back then. They were way up north. They were spread all across Canada. It's a vast land. And the only
Well,
way
and they
to
weren't.
really bring them up to date with the 21st century was to just kidnap them and put some, no, just kidding. It was just, they all agreed to go to residential school. That's the other thing too. No one was kidnapped. You see, and that's the dialogue they have now. No one was kidnapped. They all went willingly.
No, parents had to fill out an application form, and some of the schools had waiting lists because they served such a wide area. And the other unknown facts are only 1/3 of Aboriginal children ever attended a residential school. 1/3, okay, over 100-year period. 2/3 of them never saw a residential school. They only heard stories about them. Okay,
That
so the
is such an
idea
important,
that
important number, 1/3. And they're
one
acting as if
third,
every single one of them went.
the whole culture was destroyed. Yes, and a lot of them attended for just a year. Like there was no, you had to go like we did, had to go till end of grade 12 or grade 13 in Ontario. Okay, that wasn't the case with these schools. The parents could decide after a year that they're keeping their kid home again.
Well,
And,
yeah,
and
in
there was no mandatory attendance until 1920. So the first, and that's when all Canadian children were required now to attend school every day. So the first 40 years of the schools, 50 years in some cases, there was no mandatory attendance.
right. Can I ask you, Gerry, because you're 10 years older than me, I think it went away by my time, but you guys actually had truancy officers in your day, didn't you?
Oh yeah, you couldn't go hang out at the when we first got malls, you couldn't go. There were truant officers at the mall. You had to learn who they were if you were going to skip out of school too. Oh God, yeah, absolutely. They called your parents at work. They no, it was a criminal. If your parents could get legally charged if this happened on a regular basis. And so, and another aspect of this story is 15% of all residential school students, 15%. So 1 in 6 weren't Aboriginal. The trappers and the people who were like trappers, especially if they had children, they were out on the trap lines for months at a time, out hunting expeditions too. So they wanted their children put in these schools. And so we never hear about that 15%. I don't
You
think
know,
they've
I'm
ever
giving
been
Gerry the
offered.
thumbs up behind the scenes because like that's true. That's actually very true too. We need to think about that. Not just the Duke of Boers, but like anybody who could not, they couldn't just plunk a school right in front of your tent.
No, no, and you couldn't just leave your kid at home alone when you were gone for weeks on end. And so, this is all the contextual stuff that has been dropped from this story, right? In order for simple black and white and often dishonest statements to be made.
Well, and
And the more you,
isn't it awesome that they would get an education? So free education, and they're still getting free educations to go to university. They get free educations to go to university, to get law degrees, to turn around and and literally extort off people who are not their race. I
well,
mean,
and to, and
and then they turn around and say they're taxpayers too. So which one is it? Then you're ripping off all taxpayers then, even your own people.
And just on the 1/3 of students thing before we move on from that, okay? So the way it broke down, basically, is 1/3 of the Aboriginal kids attended a residential school. 1/3 of the kids attended regular schools, either a school on the reserve or in town with the white kids, okay? And 1/3 of Aboriginal kids never were in a school, never got any kind of education. So that's the breakdown over a 100-year period. So when we think about this in terms of the big picture, I would think the third who never got any education, who never learned to read and write, etc., were far more underprivileged than the ones who had to go to a residential school. And we've seen the Aboriginal leadership all the way up to Perry Bellegarde. You go back through all of the leaders of the Canadian Indian movements, as it were, they all went to residential school. That's how they could read and write and learn all this material and be able to go talk to government committees, etc. Right?
Well,
Because they had been to these
and if I
schools.
may, Gerry, my father, who grew up in the north end of Winnipeg, as did my mother, grew up in Winnipeg as well. The natives were at school with them, regular schools with them. They played hockey with them. They played football with them. Like that was the mixture of the Ukrainians and the Polish and the Austrians, and I mean they were all going to school together.
And so the reality is, it wasn't that the government created this one particular type of school, the residential school, just so they could force all the Indians into it. The government was trying to provide schooling however it could across this big country with very small populations. Okay. And when there were enough people, including on an Indian reserve, they got a school built right on the reserve. And when
And
it was impractical to do that, because there'd only be 5 kids or whatever, then they built a residential school to cover, and in some cases, hundreds and hundreds of miles
And
of
Gerry,
territory.
if I may, this colonization thing has affected all of us throughout time, and it's varying groups who do the colonizing. And the Muslims have been colonizing, the Africans.
Yes,
I mean, right
yes.
now the Africans are the colonizers, right? I mean,
Well,
it's really just. Can I just finish this? This is just the
mhm,
cabal using different races of people to go, like, depending on who had I mean, the English had the ships, right? They were capable of traveling long distances to go and colonize. There was just a lot of whatever the cabal, the ruling families could use to go and colonize. They've done that to all of us all around the world, and the natives really need to get wise to that, because their dialogue is like the most racist on the planet. There's nobody more racist than the natives, none. It's as if you have light skin, you were born only as a colonizer, and that's it, right? And they call us all settlers and stuff like that. And meanwhile, families have been here we're not that old anyway as a country. But families have been here and plowed the land and built businesses, and
mhm.
natives and Europeans, people who came here and lived, they all worked together, and they were fine all the way up until the United Nations got a hold. Same with the blacks in the United States, right? With these race wars, like everything seemed okay until the United Nations told them they needed their own education, and their own education was to hate white people.
Well, and again, with this business of colonization, okay. Um, if anybody goes to endracebasedlaw.com and clicks on genocide in the categories, a couple of the stories that will come up, for instance, one's entitled The Genocide of the Dorset. Now, what people don't understand is the Inuit, who occupy our Arctic, the lovable Eskimos, as it were, those people didn't come over till around 1100. So about 500 years before the Europeans arrived. They invaded from Siberia. They started in Alaska and moved all the way across the Canadian Arctic, all the way to the East Coast. And I'll just read you our little introduction to this story. It's called The Genocide of the Dorset. The Thule, ancestors of today's Inuit, originally from Siberia, were gradually expanding across the Arctic, displacing the older Aboriginal Dorset people, who no one's heard of anymore because they're extinct. By roughly 1200 AD, the Dorset had vanished, killed off in warfare with the Thule. Inuit oral traditions tell how the Dorset were a gentle people without bows and arrows, and thus easy to kill and drive away. So we had invading colonizers from Siberia who took the Canadian North from the original indigenous people who actually were there. God knows where they came from. And so now these people are called indigenous and have the nerve to call Canadian European descendants colonizers. The hypocrisy is so blatant. And one more example, a story on .com called What Happened to the Neutrals. Now, I have a bit of Iroquois blood in my way, way distant past, so I've spent a bit of time studying the Iroquois, who were the North American version of the Romans. Okay, they colonized big areas around their original territory in New York State, including up into Canada. And when you didn't cooperate, well, what happened to the Neutrals? This is the tribe that occupied southwestern Ontario until the 1650s. So Europeans are already here. When fellow Iroquois tribes from what is now the US rendered them extinct. In modern terminology, they were victims of genocide. This also happened to the Huron in Ontario. The Iroquois did them in as well. So when we're called colonizers, the hypocrisy, the refusal to really look at history, they only look at this one little bit of history. They won't look at their own history. They've never apologized to other tribes for land that's been stolen, for slaves that were taken, for people who were genocided. When have the Inuit ever made an apology about the massacre, the genocide committed by their ancestors? This is what really grates me. It's like, this is not honest.
Well,
And
this is what I've said all the way along. They've never been united regarding anything in the history of their time here,
no.
except to extort from people who are not their race using our court systems, our Canadian
Well,
court
so
systems.
and so the other thing post that appeared this past week on .com was called History Moment: The Massacre of the Qualicum. And I'll read you this intro because this is why we do these kind of history posts, okay? It's not because we're trying to show that they're bad people or worse than anybody else. That's not the point. This is the point. The Canadian people, and most certainly Canadian children, are almost continually subjected to Aboriginal industry propaganda, a pillar of which is the historical narrative whereby murderous, thieving Europeans impose genocide and violence on the innocent, saintly, and otherwise virtuous Aboriginal inhabitants. While not wishing to belabor the point, we still feel compelled to occasionally present some historical balance. Now, this particular story is about the Haida, who now in BC, the Haida are the cultured, artistic, loving people. Da, 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 da. The Haida were, well, they rivaled the Cape Mudge band from Quadra Island in being the most vicious murderers, genociders, slave traders on the West Coast. And it should be pointed out that when the British tried to abolish slavery, and they did it throughout their empire, one of the last places they were able to get rid of slavery was British Columbia, where the Aboriginal tribes, that was part of their traditions. We've heard many times about how the potlatches were made illegal and how that suppressed Aboriginal culture. One of the facets of the potlatch was the trading of slaves and the chiefs would give slaves as presents. Okay, so that was a major feature of see, you're making a face because this is context that's been left out when we discuss these things, context that's been left out of the whole picture. And that makes it look, well, why would they have done that? And so one of the reasons the potlatches were outlawed was part of the movement to force them to end slavery because they were not cooperating. Now, the massacre of the Qualicum refers to the Qualicum tribe in the lower mainland. And the Haida came all the way down the coast and up the Fraser and genocided these people. I mean, the only limits on the genocide was they took some women and children as slaves as well. They didn't kill everybody. Now, there was a Hudson's Bay crew that was coming to negotiate trade and was camped across the river and saw all this happen. And there was one elderly Aboriginal woman who survived, although she had been stabbed with a spear. And she related her firsthand account of what had happened. The Hudson's Bay crew the next day went to the tribe and saw all the murder and the burning of and they watched the Haida go away in their boats, celebrating their massacre of these people. Now, this post, I'm not going to read from it. It's almost all firsthand accounts from that time, from the Victoria newspaper, the New Westminster newspaper. These are interviews, and then there's a book that was written later that interviewed the fellow who headed that Hudson's Bay expedition. So this is all, in effect, documentary firsthand evidence of how they tended to treat one another, or at least how some tribes, because obviously the Qualicum weren't like that. They weren't going around massacring the Haida. It was strictly a one-way street here. Okay, so again, context. We want to look back at these historical periods, try to get a more accurate, realistic picture of what life was really like. And this post is good for that because it's almost all just the material from that time.
So which post is this, Gerry? Can you say it?
It's called The Massacre of the Qualicum.
On
It's
where?
the
On
most,
.com and
it's on
racebaselaw.com?
.com. It's the most recent post on .com.
Okay.
And
So
the
you do,
Dogrib,
he did, Gerry, excuse me just for a moment, sweetie.
yep,
Gerry
yep.
does feature stories, the bigger, more complex, like bigger research, feature stories that require more research, bigger, meatier, longer, more information, maybe it goes back a few hundred years on .com. And he just does everyday news stories because there's always a court case. There's always something in the news, somebody complaining, there's some new grievance in the news. then that's on .ca. But anyway, they both link up to each other on End Race-Based Law.
Yes. And we hope you'll come and check them out. There is so much material there. You want context? We'll show you some context.
Gerry's done an amazing job over the last 11 years. Basically, you know, you've documented this history. It's a
Well, one thing has led
one-stop
to
shop.
another. One thing has led to another, right? It just does. And luckily they haven't been able to get rid of all the historical material yet, which is why I try and copy it and retain another copy of it, because I'm worried that down the road they're not people like myself aren't going to be able to find this material to prove
Well,
our
they
point.
do a lot. They're changing our history. They're erasing history. They're literally erasing the real history. And the natives should know too. And we want the natives to come along. I mean, we have so many different races in Canada. It isn't white versus natives. And the natives call us non-natives. Like, I'm not a non-native in Canada. I'm a Canadian. We all are.
Well, if there's any descendants of the Qualicum, they should be demanding reparations from the Haida, not from the Canadian government. That's the truth of this stuff. A lot of these tribes have legitimate bitches with other tribes and are deserving of some kind of compensation for past injustices. If that's going to be the game,
Yeah, that's going to be the game.
right?
All right, Gerry, I think we should wrap this up now. So thank you for
Okay.
another good episode, and we're going to try to keep doing more of these through 2025. So, and I mean, again, they're timeless. So whenever you catch this information, it's all relevant. And the only reason why we want to end race-based law is because it's a racket and it's a game and it's not benefiting the natives. It's not benefiting anyone. It's just,
No, and it's just creating hate, like it is.
yeah. Anyway, yeah. We love everybody. We really do. We used to all, none of this used to exist. I don't ever remember this when I grew up. My mom and dad didn't either.
Just remember, the truth shall set you free.
Yes, the truth shall set you free. What
Set
a
you free.
tongue
Shall set
twister.
you
Holy, when you
free.
okay. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming around, everybody and anybody who cares enough about race laws in Canada.
Stay warm.